obviously the future of telemedicine never looked stronger. I wonder, did the pandemic accelerate your go public plans?
It didn't. Thank you for having me, Emily. It didn't accelerate the going public plans. It definitely made it easier for us as we went public to explain to people what the role of telehealth is. I think at this point, a year ago, if we were having this conversation, we would really start the conversation about explaining how people are using technology to get healthcare. I don't think anybody needs that explanation anymore, so that definitely helped.
So talk to us about your outlook, because what Amwell does is basically provides the back end for virtual services that enable doctors to visit with their patients. What is your outlook for how much more this business will grow? As I understand it, telehealth, telemedicine sort of hit its peak in April and hasn't seen as much growth since then.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because there's really different types of telehealth. I think we're just kind of turning the corner in everybody's understanding of what it would do. There is the kind of the usual type of telehealth that people are, I think, getting familiar with, which is telehealth for urgent care, where you're stuck at home, pandemic-wise, and everything. You definitely don't want to end up in an ER if you have an emerging issue, and people are using telehealth to quickly get in front of a clinician. That volume of telehealth has definitely peaked at the time that everybody was socially distancing. And as new alternatives are beginning to open up, we expect that to normalize. However, the bigger part of telehealth that we do is actually not in the area of urgent care, but rather powering clinicians to use telehealth with patients they already have a relationship with. These are chronic patients. These are patients with cancer. These are heart failure and diabetic patients, patients of hospitals that need to be seen again and again and again. That patient population has very quickly become the majority of telehealth that we do. And if anything, I can tell you that the lessons learned from the pandemic is everybody is saying, why didn't we think about this earlier? Because it is such a relief for everybody to do healthcare that way. That part is trending up and is never going back. It just opens up the door for a completely reimagination of how healthcare happens for the people who are most vulnerable.
Now, talk to us about the growth opportunities then that you see, because obviously, you've got some consumers who've been doing this now for the very first time, and, there are certainly, potentially huge new avenues of growth in the road ahead.
Yeah, I think, where do you start? The reality is that for people who are not very sick, for people who don't have any chronic condition, the word well, as we call them, most of us, telehealth stands to become a bigger and bigger place that you can go to when you have a new emerging healthcare needs, to the point that the use of telehealth for primary care, as we call it, is going to escalate in front of our eyes. There's so many people who don't have a PCP or people who can't get to a PCP, and telehealth can actually kind of grow into delivering more and more comfort in knowing that that is the first place that you go when you need healthcare. And that's going to be a big part of the growth. The second part of growth is really when we start thinking about where most healthcare dollars are going, which is to that patient population that requires very frequent care. To them, the name of the game is, can we help them using those technologies to stay at home longer, to get discharged from the hospital sooner, to get more of the different types of healthcare that they need to deal with their condition to come to them or surround them and be better coordinated. In every one of these elements, we have seen astounding realization during COVID that telehealth can do so much more than what everybody envisioned it could do even 6 months ago. Each and every one of these is a profound impact on how healthcare is being done, and really in the area that healthcare actually translates to the bigger part of the GDP, chronic patient, elder Americans, elder population. There's a sea of opportunity that we're just turning the corner to even realizing is right in front of us.
Google invested $100 million in Amwell, and Google obviously has its own health ambitions as well. Are there any opportunities to partner there?
Yeah, there's, the matchmaking between us and Google, I think is kind of the gift that gives on giving, or whatever the term is. There is an understanding that for this technology to serve people, to make healthcare surround us where we want to be, it's not only getting connection between physicians and patients. It's a lot of other technologies like AI and machine learning and sensors in the home, like Nest, if we kind of point out to Google technologies, that are going to do their part in making sure that healthcare surrounds you. It needs to be understandable. It needs to be intuitive. It doesn't have to be that painful as it used to be for so many generations. So blending together the elements that touch people directly, and Google is very good at this, with the ability to escalate an understanding that something is wrong with that person and we need to get healthcare, in front of them, is really kind of the construct of bringing the two companies together. There's a lot of other avenues that we're exploring together. Google really has an astounding world of technologies that can be helpful, but this is the thinking, and it works really well.
Now, let's talk a little bit about profitability, because as you've been growing, your losses have been widening. What is the timeline to profitability?
So we've included the timeline, in the S1, and continue to be very open about it, that this is still a work that will take a couple of years to get there. I think the realization is, and we've been very fortunate with the backing of Amwell over the years, in understanding that it's not a steady state reality in terms of the opportunity that's coming up. We want to make sure that we have the resources in order to capitalize on the completely new dimensions of telehealth that are opening up. We've heard from CMS only recently, from the Center of Medicaid and Medicare, that they're going to begin to cover telehealth. We want to be ready for that capability, for that revenue opportunity as well. So we feel very bullish about our plan in terms of the transition to profitability, and it looks like from the behavior and from everybody that joined us today to become part of the company, that it actually makes sense to everybody.